The glass doors of Mara National Bank slid open with a sharp hiss, letting in a gust of red dust from the afternoon wind. Every head turned. Standing at the entrance was Musa Kibet, a tall, weathered farmer in a faded khaki jacket and worn leather sandals. In his rough hands was a small cloth bag, the kind village men used to carry harvest earnings, the smell of earth still clinging to it. Behind the counter, Victoria Munene, the bank manager, narrowed her eyes. Her tone dripped with irritation. "Sir, we don't handle loose cash like that." "This isn't a market," Musa smiled faintly. "It's my harvest, madam. Hard-earned money, not charity." Her lips tightened. Then, with a cold laugh, she flipped the bundle of cash from the counter. The notes scattered across the shining marble floor. Gasps filled the air. Phones lifted. Cameras clicked. Musa looked down, his expression calm, too calm. He bent slowly, gathering each note one by one, whispering, "Pride walks on marble, but dignity rises from the dust." No one realized those words would change the entire bank before the sun even set. In the quiet village of Cheptiret, nestled between the rolling hills of the Rift Valley, Musa Kibet was known as a man of few words and deep patience. He had spent 3 decades tilling the same patch of land his father once worked, land that had outlasted floods, droughts, and even the greed of politicians who once tried to seize it. Each morning before dawn, Musa would walk the fields barefoot, feeling the soil as though it were a heartbeat beneath his toes. "Listen to the land," he often told his nephew Joel. "It speaks when others lie." When the rains finally came that season, his maize stretched high, thick, and golden. For the first time in years, the harvest was abundant, enough to pay every worker, repair the school's roof, and still save 2 million shillings for his dream. An irrigation pump that would make his community independent of erratic rains. That money, every coin, sat in that cloth bag now hanging from his hand. But to Mara National Bank, it was just dirty cash. For months, Musa had been making small deposits there. The tellers would exchange uneasy glances each time he walked in, as though his dusty boots were contaminating the air-conditioned office. But he never complained. He only smiled, greeted them softly, and waited patiently for his turn. The first 2 times, things had gone smoothly enough, until he met Victoria Munene, the new branch manager. Victoria was everything Musa wasn't: polished, loud, and obsessed with appearances. She had studied abroad, mastered her accent until it erased every trace of her Kikuyu roots, and now ruled her marble-floored domain like a queen. She loved how the bankers in Nairobi praised her. Professionalism, her way of keeping the rural crowd out of corporate spaces. Her mornings began with imported coffee and ended with selfies captioned, "Char Boss Lady." But beneath the perfume and polish lived something fragile, a fear of being ordinary. When Musa walked into her branch that morning, his khaki jacket and sunburned face reminded her of the life she wanted to forget. A childhood selling vegetables by the roadside before her father's luck changed. So, when she saw his cloth bag filled with cash, her pride coiled tight. Keziah Mwangi, one of the junior tellers, noticed the tension immediately. She'd seen this story before. Farmers, boda riders, market women, all treated with the same quiet disrespect. Kezia herself came from a small town. She knew humility when she saw it. Still, she kept silent, hands trembling slightly as she processed another customer's slip. Across the hall, Tunde Okoro, a Nigerian tech vlogger filming a series on modern Kenya in motion, was waiting to cash his business check. He wasn't planning to record anything that day, until the shouting began. Victoria's voice sliced through the air. "I told you, sir, this is not acceptable. We have deposit protocols. This mess cannot be processed here." Every eye turned to the farmer standing calmly before her desk. Musa's voice was low but steady. "My money is not a mess, madam. It comes from soil that feeds this nation." A few chuckles rippled from the customers at the back. But Victoria leaned forward, her tone cold as glass. "Then maybe the soil should keep it." And with a flick of her manicured hand, she swept the notes off the counter. The soft flutter of bills filled the silence like thunder. Shilling after shilling scattered, sliding over the spotless marble. Keziah froze. Her lips parted, but fear pinned her voice. A security guard shifted uneasily near the door. Someone whispered, "That's too much, madam." Tunde reached for his phone. Musa didn't move for several seconds. Then quietly he bent down, his knees pressed against the cold floor. One by one, he gathered each note with a farmer's patience, fingers cracked, hands trembling slightly but steady. When he was done, he stood, dusted his trousers, and looked Victoria in the eye. No anger, no bitterness, just calm. When you throw away the sweat of a farmer, you throw away your own bread, he said softly. Then he turned to leave. The crowd parted. The phone stayed raised. Keziah's eyes burned with guilt. Victoria scoffed, pretending not to care, but her heart hammered. Outside, Tunde stopped recording. For now. He had enough. An hour later, the clip was already spreading online. The caption read, "Bank manager throws a farmer's money on the floor in Kisumu. You won't believe his reaction." By noon, it had 60,000 views. By evening, 500,000. But at that moment, inside the bank, none of them knew. Victoria sat sipping her coffee, proud of her discipline. Musa walked home beneath the setting sun, whispering to himself, "The wind will carry truth where words cannot." And Keziah, unable to sleep that night, prayed softly, "Lord, forgive us when we stay silent in front of wrong." The story was just beginning, and before the next sunrise, the entire town would know the name Musa Kibet. The night that followed the incident at Mara National Bank was unusually restless in Kisumu town. The wind howled through the streets like gossip carrying secrets, and every small cafe and boda stage was alive with murmurs about that farmer and the bank lady. By the time the streetlights flickered on, the clip had already found its way across Facebook, TikTok, and X, Twitter. The thumbnail froze on the moment Victoria's hand swept the money off the counter. The caption in bold Swahili and English, "Bank manager throws farmer's money on the floor. He reacts with unexpected dignity." Within 2 hours, "Respect the Farmer" was trending in Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa. The first 30 seconds of silence after Musa's calm words, "When you throw away the sweat of a farmer, you throw away your own bread," became the most replayed moment online. At his modest homestead in Cheptere, Musa sat by a small paraffin lamp, unaware of the digital storm. His radio was tuned to the late-night gospel hour, and his old phone, a dusty Nokia without internet, buzzed only when his nephew Joel rushed in, panting. "Uncle Musa, you're all over the internet." Musa looked up from mending his worn jacket. "What internet, Joel?" "The video from the bank." "It's everywhere. They're calling you Baba Dignity. Even the TV station shared it." Musa frowned, confused. "Someone recorded that?" "Yes." "A Nigerian vlogger, Tunde. He posted it live." "People are angry. Not just angry, Uncle. Inspired." Musa leaned back in his wooden chair, his face unreadable. "The world moves faster than decency these days," he murmured. But deep inside, something stirred. Not pride, not revenge. Something quieter, like purpose awakening from sleep. By morning, the story had spread far beyond Kisumu. Radio hosts discussed it on breakfast shows. How can we claim to respect agriculture and yet humiliate the very people who feed us? Hashtags flooded the airwaves. "Your farmers, our dignity." Musa Kibet, "Your justice for the farmer," in Nairobi. Tunde Okoro woke up to 2.3 million views on his video and over 100,000 new followers. He scrolled through comments, some outraged, others poetic. He picked his dignity from the floor, and now the nation must pick its conscience. We've all been Musa once, judged by appearance, not worth. Respect begins with how you treat the person who can't fight back. Tunde knew he had struck something deeper than virality. He opened his laptop, hit record, and said, "This isn't just a video. It's a mirror. Look at it closely. What you see in that farmer is what we've all ignored for too long. Dignity in plain clothes." The clip would become the opening monologue of his next viral feature. Dignity on the floor, the real cost of disrespect. Back in Kisumu, Mara National Bank looked different that morning. The air was heavy with unease. Tellers whispered, security guards kept glancing at their phones, and customers filmed quietly from the queue. Every few minutes, another notification pinged on Victoria's phone. Articles, comments, hashtags. She tried to act composed, but her hands shook as she signed documents. By 9 a.m., the bank's head office in Nairobi the regional director's tone was sharp and cold. "Victoria, Your branch is trending for all the wrong reasons. Legal is already drafting statements. You're on temporary suspension pending investigation. Victoria's mouth went dry. Sir, I was following protocol. Protocol doesn't include throwing customers' money on the floor. There's CCTV, Victoria. This isn't just bad PR, it's a scandal. She hung up slowly, staring at her reflection in the polished desk. For the first time, the marble floor beneath her heels didn't look powerful. It looked fragile. Meanwhile, at the nearby market, Moose's neighbors gathered around an old TV in Mom and Joki's cafe, watching a news reporter narrate his story. Footage played on repeat. Victoria's gesture, the scattered bills, Moose's quiet words. Mom and Joki wiped her eyes with her apron.
Hey, that man showed real class,
She said softly. No shouting, no insult, just dignity. Now they'll see, said old Mzee Laban, slapping his knee. These people think respect is bought with a tie. Children crowded the doorway, laughing as someone shouted, Our farmer is famous. Musa, walking to the market for salt and soap, didn't notice the stares at first. Then someone clapped. Another whistled. Soon, strangers approached him with outstretched hands. Baba Musa, we saw you online. You spoke for all of us. He smiled humbly. I only spoke the truth, my friends. The rest is God's doing. But the truth was, the moment still burned inside him. Not the humiliation, but the symbol of it. Money from the land, scattered like waste in front of the people who depended on it. That was not just an insult to him, but to every farmer across Africa whose sweat built cities that forgot them. By noon, journalists from Citizen TV, NTV, and even BBC Africa were trying to reach him. One by one, they arrived at his home, dusty vehicles parking near his small gate. Tanda himself returned, camera in hand, excitement in his voice. Mr. Musa, you have no idea what you've started. They're calling it the Dignity Movement. Musa chuckled softly. Movements are like storms, young man. They come and go. Dignity is like soil. It stays. But sir, Tunda said, leaning forward, the world is listening now. Banks across Kenya are reviewing customer treatment protocols. You've started a wave of reform. Musa's expression softened. If it changes even one heart, then maybe God allowed that shame for a reason. Tunda's eyes glistened. Can I record that? Musa nodded. The words would echo across Africa that evening. At Mara National Bank's headquarters, chaos ruled. Social media teams were overwhelmed. Angry customers demanded answers. In one viral tweet, a customer from Uganda shared her own experience. They laughed at me when I came with coins from my tomato stall. I never went back. Watching Musa made me weep. Thank you, sir. Within hours, the CEO of Mara National Bank released a statement. We are deeply sorry for the incident at our Kisima branch. The bank does not tolerate discrimination or disrespect of any customer. An internal audit has begun. All parties involved are under review. But the public wasn't satisfied. They wanted action, not words. That evening, a convoy of black SUVs pulled up in front of the Kisima branch. The regional director, Margaret O'Deed, stepped out, tall, poised, and known for her sharp integrity. She walked past the cameras, past the murmuring crowd, and straight into Victoria's office. The room went silent. Ms. Muneen, Margaret began, do you realize what you've done to this institution? Victoria's lips trembled. Madam, it was a misunderstanding. The man was disrespectful to procedure. His money was filthy, uncounted. Margaret slammed a printed transcript of the viral comments on the desk. Disrespectful? The only disrespect here was yours. You threw away this bank's reputation for arrogance. She gestured to the window, where dozens of protesters now gathered holding placards. Respect the farmer. Dignity over discrimination. You are hereby suspended with immediate effect, Margaret declared. Hand over your badge and keys. Victoria's voice cracked. Please, madam, enough. You humiliated a man who could have been your father. Now face the consequences with the same pride you displayed yesterday. The room remained still as security escorted Victoria out. Cameras flashed. It was poetic. The same marble floor she ruled over now bore the sound of her heels in defeat. Outside, Tunda's live stream captured every moment. His followers flooded the comments. Justice served in real time. Dignity wins again. May every arrogant boss meet their Musa. But inside the crowd, Musa stood quietly, his old hat shading his face. He hadn't come to celebrate. He came to make sure no one else would be treated that way again. Margaret approached him after the press cleared. "Mr. Cubett," she said respectfully, extending her hand. "On behalf of Mara National Bank, I want to apologize." Musa shook her hand gently. "Apologies matter only if they lead to reform." Margaret nodded. "Then help us build it." He blinked, unsure what she meant. "Come to Nairobi next week," she said. "Our board wants to hear your recommendations." You spoke the truth. Let it guide us. That night back home, Joel found his uncle sitting under the stars again, staring into the dark fields. "Uncle, you've become a national hero," Joel said softly. "A simple act, and now you're changing systems." Musa smiled faintly. "Heroes chase fame, farmers chase rain. I'm just planting something new. Maybe this time it's not maize, but respect." The crickets sang in the silence that followed. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled over the valley, the promise of rain. In Nairobi, journalists debated on TV panels. Was this just an isolated incident or a symptom of class discrimination in modern Africa? Business analysts called it the Jefferson effect, referencing global parallels, how small acts of resistance can ignite national introspection. By the third day, Mara National Bank's board met for an emergency session. They voted to create a customer dignity reform policy, and the first name on their new advisory committee was Musa Kibet. The announcement flooded social media. From farmer to reformer, dignity finds its voice. Across the continent, people began sharing their own stories of silent humiliation, domestic workers ignored, old men disrespected in hospitals, artisans mocked in luxury stores. Each post ended the same way: "We are all Musa." And as for Victoria Munene, she sat alone in her apartment scrolling through thousands of angry comments. Each one pierced deeper than the last. Her empire of pride had collapsed overnight. But among the noise, one comment stood out. "Sometimes life forces you to kneel, not for shame, but to learn humility from the dust." She stared at it for a long time. For the first time, she understood what Musa's calm eyes had really meant. Outside, the rain began to fall. Soft, cleansing, relentless. A week after the public uproar, Nairobi stirred under a gray dawn. Buses honked through Uhuru Highway, and newspaper vendors shouted headlines that had Musa's face printed on every front page. "Farmer of dignity invited to speak at the National Bank Summit." Humility turns hero. The story of Musa Kibet inspires Africa. At his village, the invitation letter still felt unreal in Musa's hands. The bank had sent a car to collect him, a black Toyota Prado parked outside his mud-walled home, its polished surface reflecting the quiet pride of his neighbors. Children waved excitedly as Joel helped him pack his small bag. "Uncle, Nairobi is waiting for you," he said, beaming. Musa smiled faintly. "Nairobi does not wait for anyone, Joel, but maybe it can listen, just this once." The journey from Chepteret to the capital took 6 long hours. Musa watched from the window as landscapes shifted, fields fading into highways, maize and cassava giving way to glass towers and billboards. He thought of how the same earth that grew food for millions now seemed forgotten under the weight of ambition. He whispered a prayer: "Lord, may my words be few but heavy. May my heart remain humble even when the world stares." Beside him sat Tunde, camera in hand, documenting every mile. "Uncle Musa," he said softly, "how do you stay so calm when the world has turned you into a symbol?" Musa chuckled. "Because symbols fade, my son. But the truth they carry does not. I'm not here to be celebrated. I'm here to remind them what respect means." Tunde nodded, moved. He turned the camera toward Musa and asked, "What will you say to the board tomorrow?" Musa looked outside. That a bank without empathy is like a farm without rain, rich in appearance, but barren at its core. That clip would later go viral again, this time titled, "The Wisdom of Baba Musa." When Musa arrived at Mara National Bank's headquarters, the air-conditioned lobby shimmered with glass and steel. Executives hurried past, clutching tablets and lattes, their shoes echoing across marble floors, the same kind of floor where his dignity had once been thrown. Security guards saluted respectfully this time. A young receptionist rose to greet him with a nervous smile. "Good morning, Mr. Kibet. The board is expecting you." He nodded and walked slowly, his weathered cane tapping softly as if counting every. In the conference room, a dozen board members sat around a long mahogany table. Cameras rolled. Journalists whispered. At the head of the table was Margaret Odidi, the regional director who had suspended Victoria. "Mr. Kibet," she began, "thank you for accepting our invitation. We've reviewed the incident and implemented disciplinary measures, but we want to go further. We want your counsel." Musa looked around, faces of wealth and intellect, but also curiosity. "I am no counselor, madam," he said quietly. "I am just a man who knows what it feels like to be treated as less than human." Margaret leaned forward. "That's exactly why we need you." Musa stood slowly, resting both hands on his cane. The room fell silent. "When a farmer brings money to a bank," he began, "he brings more than currency. He brings the sweat of his land, the hunger of his children, and the hope that his labor still matters." He paused, eyes gliding across the table. "I was humiliated, yes, but my story is not rare. There are countless others who walk into places of power and are reminded that they do not belong. But you, ladies and gentlemen, hold keys to something bigger, not just safes of wealth, but safes of dignity." He looked toward a young woman taking notes. "You see that soil beneath your shoes when you step out? That soil fed your fathers and mothers. You stand tall today because someone bent low to till it. Never forget that." Silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of cameras. Tunde whispered from behind the lens, "That's history speaking." Musa continued, his voice calm but firm. "I do not seek revenge. I seek restoration. Build a policy where no man or woman is judged by the dirt on their clothes, but by the honesty of their work. Teach your staff that courtesy costs nothing, but saves everything." The board members exchanged glances, some teary-eyed, others nodding solemnly. Margaret rose to her feet, clapping softly. One by one, others joined until the room erupted in applause. Musa bowed his head. "Do not clap for me," he said gently. "Clap for the lesson. It came at a price." In another part of the city, Victoria Munane sat inside a small apartment, curtains drawn. Her dismissal had gone public and she'd become a symbol, not of leadership, but of shame. Her friends avoided her. Recruiters ignored her calls. For the first time in years, she had no power, no audience, no title, only silence. But one evening, as she scrolled through comments again, she saw a clip from Musa's speech at the board meeting. His words, "Never forget the soil that fed you." Something inside her broke open. Tears she had long suppressed began to flow. She remembered her own father, a mechanic who had died working 2 jobs to send her to school. His hands were rough, his clothes stained, but his pride was pure. And yet, she had looked down on men like him. She picked up her phone and typed a message. "Dear Mr. Kibet, this is Victoria, the woman you met at the bank. I know I cannot undo the harm I caused, but I want to apologize face to face. If you can find it in your heart to meet me, I'll come wherever you say." She hit send, trembling. Days later, under a gentle afternoon sun, Victoria arrived in Kisima. No cameras, no reporters, just quiet wind and red dust. She found Musa tending to his crops, hoe in hand. His shirt damp with sweat, he looked up, recognizing her instantly but saying nothing. "Mr. Kibet," she began softly. "I came to apologize." He nodded slowly. "Then speak your piece." Tears filled her eyes. "I was blind, sir. I thought my degree made me better than others. But your calm, your silence that day, it exposed me. I humiliated the very kind of man who raised me." Musa wiped his brow and leaned on his hoe. "Humility doesn't come from words, my daughter. It comes from service. What will you do with what you've learned?" She hesitated. "I want to help. Maybe teach others what not to do, maybe rebuild what I broke." He smiled faintly. "Then you are already forgiven. Go, and plant that lesson wherever arrogance grows." As she turned to leave, Musa called after her. "Victoria!" She stopped. "Next time you handle another farmer's money, remember it's not paper, it's sacrifice." She nodded, tears rolling freely. By the end of the month, Mara National Bank launched its Respect Every Hand campaign, a policy co-authored by Musa himself. Training videos featuring his speech became mandatory across East Africa. Banks in Ghana, Nigeria, and South Africa began adopting similar reforms. In a symbolic gesture, Mara Bank unveiled a bronze statue in its Kisima branch courtyard, a simple farmer holding a handful of soil. The plaque read, "To every hand that feeds nations, we see you now." At the unveiling ceremony, Margaret O'Deed addressed the crowd. "Humility is not weakness. It is the highest form of strength." Thanks to one man's quiet dignity, we have remembered who we are. Tunde captured every moment. His documentary, The Farmer Who Taught the Bank to Bow, premiering online to millions of views. Musa's life didn't change in luxury. He still farmed, still wore his faded hat. But everywhere he went, people stood when he entered. Not because he was famous, but because he had restored something sacred: respect. Months later, sitting under the acacia tree beside his home, Musa watched the sunset. Children played nearby, laughter echoing through the fields. Tunde sat beside him, camera off this time. "You know, Uncle," Tunde said, "you could run for office now. The whole country would vote for you," Musa chuckled. "And abandon my mace?" "No, my son. The soil doesn't need politicians. It needs caretakers." He pointed toward the horizon. "Change doesn't begin in palaces. It begins in small hearts willing to do what's right when no one claps." Tunde smiled, nodding. "You've taught us all that." As the sky deepened into gold, Musa closed his eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude. He had not sought fame or vengeance, only justice with grace. And in return, the world had given him something eternal: legacy. The story of Musa Kibet had crossed borders. In Lagos, a Nigerian radio host opened his morning show with the words, "From the red soil of Kenya comes a lesson for all of Africa. Humility is power." In Ghana, a bank in Kumasi aired Musa's speech during staff orientation. In South Africa, a television commercial quoted him word for word. "A bank without empathy is like a farm without rain." What had started as a moment of humiliation had become a movement of honor. Everywhere, people spoke of the dignity movement: schools, ministries, and even parliaments. It wasn't about Musa anymore. It was about Conscience. Tunde's documentary, The Farmer Who Taught the Bank to Bow, was now on Netflix Africa. It opened with the scene of Victoria throwing the money, followed by the slow motion of the bills scattering across the floor. Then Musa's calm, unshaken face. The narration was Tunde's voice. When dignity is trampled, the ground itself remembers. The film ended with footage of Musa tilling his farm at dawn, framed by the rising sun. Across the continent, young people began filming their own stories of silent resistance. Market women confronting unfair taxes, drivers demanding respect from police, students refusing to cheat despite pressure. They used the hashtag #IamMusaKibet in Nairobi. Activists organized the Day of Dignity. Thousands wore brown shirts with the slogan, "Respect is wealth." And in Chepteret, Musa's once quiet farm had become a pilgrimage site. People traveled from all over East Africa to meet him, shake his hand, or simply sit beside him for a photo. But fame, like rain, does not always fall evenly. It started small, a few visitors every week, then dozens every day. Musa's simple homestead soon overflowed with strangers seeking blessings, advice, and photographs. He welcomed them kindly at first, offering tea and words of wisdom, but soon some began to treat him like a saint. They brought gifts, goats, money, even land titles. A few knelt before him. "Please, Baba Musa, pray for my business. Touch my child. Maybe your humility will bless him." Musa tried to stop them. "My friends, I am no prophet," he would say. "I'm just a man who once stood up for himself." But they wouldn't listen. The irony pained him. The very dignity he had fought to restore was now turning into worship. Joel, his nephew, noticed it too. "Uncle," he said one evening, "maybe you should tell them to stop coming." Musa sighed. "And if I turn them away, do I not become like the bank manager who turned me away?" "No, Joel. We must teach them differently, not reject them." So instead of pushing them out, he started gathering them under the acacia tree every Sunday. He would speak for an hour, not about religion or fame, but about simple things: honesty, humility, and hard work. He called it the Dignity Fellowship. One afternoon, a convoy of sleek black SUVs rolled into his compound. Men in suits stepped out. Reporters recognized the emblem: the county governor's office. The governor himself, Honorable Patrick Mooley, approached Musa with cameras flashing. "Mr. Kibet," he boomed, "the pride of our nation, honor you with the Governor's Medal of Excellence." Crowds cheered. But Tunde, who was visiting again to film a follow-up story, whispered uneasily, "That man's name keeps showing up in corruption reports." Musa shook the governor's hand calmly. "I am honored, sir. But tell me, what does this medal mean? The governor smiled for the cameras. It means the government values citizens like you, people of honesty and dignity. Musa's eyes narrowed slightly. Then perhaps the government should start by showing dignity to its farmers. Pay them fairly, fix the roads that carry their produce, and stop taking bribes from the poor. The crowd gasped. The governor's smile faltered, but the cameras were still rolling. He forced a laugh. Of course. We're working on that. Tunde's camera zoomed in on Musa's face, unflinching, fearless. The clip would later become the documentary's most quoted moment. That night, Tunde and Musa sat by the fire. Uncle, Tunde said, you could be something bigger, a leader. Maybe even a reformer across Africa. Musa smiled faintly. Tunde, I'm already a leader, of my own heart. If you can't rule your pride, you cannot rule people. But what you did today, standing up to the governor, that was bold. It wasn't bold, Musa replied softly. It was necessary. Truth doesn't belong to the brave. It belongs to the honest. Tunde nodded, deeply moved. He realized Musa's greatness was not in what he said, but in what he refused to compromise. Later that week, Tunde edited the footage into a short film titled The Farmer and the Governor. It went viral within hours. Again. Viewers called it the slap that shook the system. Months later, the African Union invited Musa to the Continental Ethics and Reform Summit in Addis Ababa. Leaders, economists, and activists from 30 countries attended. Musa stood before them, a farmer among diplomats. The room buzzed with respect. He began softly. When power loses humility, nations lose direction. He walked slowly across the stage. You write policies, but you forget people. You speak of growth, yet the roots of your people wither from neglect. If you wish to build Africa, begin with respect, not for titles, but for toil. The hall fell silent. Then, applause thundered like a storm. A Tanzanian minister whispered, "He speaks like an ancestor." Another said, "No, he speaks like a mirror." While the continent applauded, trouble brewed back home. Some local politicians began using the Dignity Fellowship for their campaigns, twisting Musa's message for votes. Banners appeared with his face beside theirs. Crowds chanted his name at rallies. Musa was horrified. He gathered his followers under the tree one Sunday. "My friends," he said sternly, "if my name becomes a tool for ambition, then I have failed. Dignity is not a party. It is a principle." A hush fell over the crowd. Joel looked at his uncle with pride. "Uncle," he whispered, "you've turned words into fire." Meanwhile, in Nairobi, Victoria had rebuilt herself. She volunteered at community programs teaching customer empathy and ethical leadership. Her humility had become her redemption. When she heard about the Dignity Fellowship, she traveled to Chepteret quietly. Standing before the crowd, she said, "I once threw a man's money on the floor. Today I stand before him and all of you to say that I learned my worth not from my job, but from his forgiveness." The audience erupted in applause. Musa stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. "This," he said, "is what true change looks like. Not punishment, but repentance." Victoria smiled through tears. "You gave me back my humanity, Mr. Kibet." He shook his head gently. "No, my daughter. You found it yourself." That moment would mark the beginning of a partnership that surprised everyone. Musa and Victoria co-founding a training organization called Hands of Grace, dedicated to teaching ethics and empathy in workplaces across Africa. Months passed. Donations poured in for Hands of Grace. Musa began receiving offers, TV interviews, international awards, even invitations to move abroad. One night, Tunde found him sitting quietly on his porch. "Uncle," he said, "everyone wants a piece of you now. Aren't you tempted to take it? To live in comfort after all this?" Musa smiled, gazing at the dark fields. "Tunde, I have all the comfort I need. The soil still listens when I speak. The stars still answer when I pray. That is enough." He paused. "But if ever I forget where I came from, promise me, remind me of the floor." "The floor?" Tunde asked. "Yes," Musa said softly. "The floor where my money fell, and my pride rose." By the year's end, Hands of Grace had trained over 10,000 professionals across Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda. Banks, hospitals, and schools signed pledges committing to the Dignity Code, and one morning, the president of Kenya invited Musa to the State House. As cameras flashed, the president handed him a framed decree recognizing the Dignity Movement as a national civic program. From this day forward, the president said, every institution in our nation will remember that respect is the foundation of service. Musa accepted the honor humbly, saying only, if I have taught anything, it is that greatness begins when pride ends. The crowd rose to its feet. That night, back in Cheptiret, as rain tapped gently on his roof, Musa sat by his lamp writing in an old notebook. He titled the page, Lessons from the Floor. He wrote, dignity is not given by others. It is kept within, even when the world throws it away. The measure of a man is not how he stands in triumph, but how he kneels in humility. And sometimes God lets us fall, not to break us, but to show us what truly stands. He closed the notebook, smiling quietly. The movement had outgrown him, but that was the point. True dignity doesn't belong to one man. It belongs to everyone who remembers that respect is the seed from which nations grow. This part escalates the stakes. Musa's movement faces its ultimate test. Forces of greed and corruption clash with dignity, and the first major wave of poetic justice sweeps across institutions in East Africa. Cheptiret had grown crowded. Musa's farm now welcomed not just pilgrims, but journalists, NGOs, and even tech startups seeking advice. The movement had expanded, from the Dignity Fellowship in Kenya to advocacy workshops across Uganda and Tanzania. But not everyone was happy. The National Banking Federation called an emergency meeting in Nairobi. Executives from major banks, previously indifferent to ethical practices, felt their power threatened. One voice, the loudest, was Victor Karanja, CEO of a multinational bank with branches in Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda. People are now thinking their dignity is negotiable, that if we mismanage their money, someone will live stream it. He bellowed. Musa had heard of Karanja, the man known for ruthless acquisitions and dismissive treatment of clients. His reputation for prioritizing profits over people had made him wealthy, but feared. A televised debate was scheduled. Musa Kibet versus Victor Karanja. The topic, can African institutions deliver respect without sacrificing profit? The country watched. When the debate began, Tunde streamed it live to millions. Victor Karanja, in a tailored suit, leaned forward aggressively. Mr. Kibet, your ideals are naive. Respect is intangible. Banks deal in numbers, not feelings. Musa remained calm. He adjusted his hat, looked directly into the camera, and spoke slowly. Numbers are not intangible, sir. They represent labor, dreams, survival. You do not serve institutions, you serve people. And when you forget that, you rob everyone of their dignity. Gasps filled the studio. Viewers flooded social media. Hashtags like No Dignity Wins and Musa vs Karanja trended within minutes. The debate was civil yet electric. Every statement from Musa carried the weight of decades of hardship, humility, and farming experience. Victor's attacks, while polished, rang hollow. By the end, Tunde estimated over 4 million live viewers. The movement had reached a tipping point. 2 days later, the Ethics Commission of Kenya announced an audit of all commercial banks. Inspections revealed shocking truths: mismanaged customer funds, discriminatory practices, and ignored complaints. Victoria, Musa's co-founder at Hands of Grace, received a tip-off about Victor Karanja personally forcing junior staff to underreport customer complaints. The story exploded. Newspapers, TV, and social media broadcast the audit findings nationwide. Victor Karanja resigned under immense public pressure. His bank's board publicly committed to Musa's Dignity Code. Across East Africa, other banks began internal reviews, some voluntarily, others forced by governments. Meanwhile, smaller banks sought consultancy from Hands of Grace, realizing that ignoring dignity now equated to risking public backlash. Musa traveled to Nairobi to oversee reforms at the city's largest banks. The moment he entered the Central Trust Bank, staff froze. He smiled gently, nodding, not with authority, but recognition. I am here to help you protect what is already yours, your integrity. Managers who had once viewed him with suspicion now listened respectfully. Training sessions were rigorous, spanning ethics, customer relations, and empathy. Tunde documented every moment. The footage would later inspire a documentary series titled From Soil to Society, Musa's Dignity Revolution. News of Musa's reforms spread beyond East Africa. In Ghana, a minister cited Musa during a parliamentary debate about banking accountability. In Nigeria, Lagos schools included his story in civic education classes. Even South Africa adapted elements of the Dignity Code for municipal offices. Africa was witnessing an awakening. Respect was now a currency as vital as money itself. Yet Musa's personal life faced strain. Joel, his nephew, worried about the growing crowds at the farm. "Uncle, people are treating this like a show now. What if the wrong people come?" Musa sighed. "Joel, dignity is not a performance. If they misuse it, that is their failing. We teach. We cannot control hearts." And then the test came. Late one evening, an NGO reported that some politicians had begun co-opting the movement for personal gain, appearing alongside Musa in public, while quietly violating the very principles he stood for. Musa could feel the weight of responsibility. If this movement becomes a tool for corruption, then all my efforts mean nothing. Joel placed a reassuring hand on his uncle's shoulder. "We will hold them accountable. Your message is stronger than any politician's ambition." Musa returned to Chepteret to regroup. He walked to the acacia tree, the site of the original Sunday fellowship. The crowd had grown to over 500 people, eager for guidance. Victoria stood beside him. "We need a symbol," she said. "Something to remind everyone, banks, politicians, and citizens alike, of the original lesson." Musa nodded. "The floor," he said simply. "We must remind them where dignity starts, with recognition, not wealth." The following week, Musa staged a symbolic act, a ceremonial gathering at the farm where a replica of scattered currency was placed on the ground, representing the potential loss of dignity when respect is ignored. He invited leaders from local banks to kneel briefly, not as a punishment, but as a humbling reminder. Tunde live-streamed the entire event. Within hours, the footage went viral across Africa. In Nairobi, the central bank announced new regulations: mandatory dignity training for all banking staff, anonymous customer reporting apps for real-time oversight, annual public audits with penalties for violations. By the end of the year, 842 banks across East Africa had formally adopted Musa's Dignity Code. Employees who had previously treated customers with disdain were retrained. Some who failed the program, like a branch manager in Mombasa who mocked elderly depositors, were terminated publicly. It was a perfect example of poetic justice. Accountability was no longer optional. Musa and Victoria formalized their partnership. Hands of Grace established offices in Nairobi, Kampala, Kigali, and Dar es Salaam. They trained over 15,000 employees, reaching beyond banking into hospitals, schools, and government offices. A monthly audit, called the Musa Index, was published online, ranking institutions by their dignity compliance. Banks that failed faced public scrutiny, and suddenly, respect had real consequences. Thousands of letters arrived daily. Some were heartfelt. "Your movement saved my family from exploitation. We now know that our voices matter." Others were more profound. "I am a young banker. I learned that treating money with respect begins by treating the person behind it with respect. Thank you, Mr. Kibet, for changing the way I see my profession." Despite fame and influence, Musa remained grounded. He still tilled his farm every morning, drank tea under the acacia tree, and walked barefoot among his crops. Tunde asked him once, "Uncle, you could sit in offices in Nairobi or Addis Ababa. Why return here every day?" Musa smiled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Because if I forget the soil, I forget the lesson. Dignity is rooted in humility, not accolades." By the end of the year, African leaders, CEOs, and citizens all acknowledged Musa's story as transformative. In Kigali, a bank CEO publicly stated, "We no longer handle money, we honor it." In Accra, schools held Dignity Week, teaching children to respect peers and elders. In Lagos, social media campaigns encouraged citizens to stand against unfair treatment in public spaces. Musa's act of standing quietly while his money hit the floor had become a blueprint for systemic change. As Part 4 closes, the tension begins to shift toward resolution. Musa's influence is now continental. Institutions have been reformed. Poetic justice has been served. Yet the true test remains. Can these changes endure beyond the initial fervor? Tunde sets up his camera one last time under the acacia tree. This is the moment Africa will remember. The turning point where dignity became law, not favor. Musa looks at the sunset, walking slowly along the field. If our people remember the lesson of the floor, the rest will follow naturally. The camera pans up, catching the golden-orange horizon. The message is clear. Dignity, once defended, spreads like sunlight across the continent. Musa Kibet stood under the acacia tree once more, the warm Kenyan sun casting long shadows over his farm. The same field where the scattered currency had first ignited a movement now buzzed with quiet reverence. Journalists, bankers, students, and local villagers alike had come to witness the symbolic culmination of what had begun as a simple act of refusal to accept disrespect. The golden plaque, engraved with the words, "Every person's dignity matters. Every coin represents dreams," shimmered gently in the morning light. Children traced their fingers over the raised letters, their parents watching with pride. This was no longer just Musa's story. It had become Africa's story. Tunde adjusted the camera, live streaming to millions across the continent. Comments flooded in from Nairobi to Accra, Lagos to Kigali. People shared their own experiences, stories of subtle discrimination, and moments when they had felt invisible or dismissed. And now, they were empowered. The message was clear. Dignity is not a privilege. It is a right. Musa's gaze shifted to Victoria, who had overseen the continental expansion of Hands of Grace. Together, they had trained over 20,000 employees, not only in banking but in hospitals, schools, and government offices. The Musa Index, published monthly, now ranked more than 1,500 institutions across East and West Africa for their compliance with dignity standards. Banks that had once scoffed at the idea now proudly displayed plaques in their lobbies, inviting clients to report violations freely and without fear. But it wasn't just institutions that had changed. People had changed. Victoria, the former bank manager who had humiliated him, had flown in from Nairobi to lead one of the regional training programs. She approached him quietly, her head bowed in respect. "Musa," she said softly, "I want to thank you for showing me that humility and empathy are strengths, not weaknesses. My life has been transformed because of your grace." Musa smiled, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We all grow together, Victoria. Dignity is not a gift. It is a responsibility we all share." Meanwhile, across Africa, governments and institutions had taken note. Ghana had passed the Musa Kibet Dignity Act, requiring annual training for all public-facing employees. Nigeria had established a commission to monitor discrimination in financial services. South Africa and Uganda were implementing similar reforms, and corporate boards now faced public accountability for the first time. The ripple effect was undeniable. Stories poured in. A mother in Accra who had once been denied access to a microloan now received funds for her small business. A young student in Lagos found her first job because recruiters had been trained to recognize potential rather than prejudice. A hospital in Kigali established patient dignity protocols after witnessing the East African Dignity Award ceremony, which honored institutions upholding Musa's principles. Back on the farm, Musa walked along the rows of maize and vegetables, each stalk a testament to patience, labor, and integrity. He remembered the day his money had hit the ground in Kisumu, the humiliation, the fear, the disbelief. That moment had seemed small, almost trivial, yet from that single act of courage, an entire movement had emerged. The scattered bills had become seeds of systemic change, growing into a harvest of justice, accountability, and human respect. Tunde lowered the camera and stepped beside him. "Uncle, look at what you've done. Africa is listening. Africa is watching. People everywhere are talking about dignity because of you." Musa chuckled softly, adjusting his hat. "It was never about me, Tunde. It was about every person who ever felt invisible, every voice that was ignored, every dream dismissed. Dignity belongs to everyone, not just the loudest or the richest." Victoria joined them, holding a tablet showing letters from ordinary people whose lives had been touched by the movement. One read, "Your stand reminded me that respect cannot be bought. I now run my business differently, treating every customer as a human being first." Another, "I teach children about dignity now. I tell them that even a coin on the floor has a story." Musa felt a swell of quiet pride. He had grown vegetables for decades, feeding bodies, but now he had nourished hearts and minds across the continent. His legacy was no longer measured in crops or money. but in the principles he had sown and the transformations he had inspired. The golden plaque beneath the acacia tree caught the sunlight one last time. Its message was simple yet profound. Every person's dignity matters. Every coin represents dreams. Musa Kibet turned to the crowd of onlookers, the camera capturing every face lit with hope and determination. He spoke with the calm authority of a man who had weathered storms, endured humiliation, and emerged wiser. Friends, dignity cannot be bought or sold. It cannot be earned through wealth, nor lost through poverty. It exists in every moment we choose to see another person, to respect them, to honor their labor and their dreams. Today, Africa knows that one person's courage can ignite change, but it is our responsibility, every one of us, to protect that dignity for the next generation. Applause echoed across the farm, rising like waves against the acacia leaves. Young people clapped, bankers nodded, and journalists documented the scene, understanding they were witnessing history. Tunde panned the camera over the crowd, showing faces glowing with realization. Dignity was no longer an abstract ideal. It was alive, palpable, and actionable. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Musa walked slowly toward his home, each step deliberate, grounded, and dignified. The movement he had begun would outlast him, carried forward by those who had learned the simple yet profound lesson. Respect is the foundation of justice, and every individual has the power to demand it. In Nairobi, Kisumu, Accra, Lagos, Kigali, and beyond, African institutions were changing. Policies were rewritten, training programs implemented, and accountability mechanisms strengthened. But the most profound change was cultural. People everywhere began to ask themselves in their businesses, schools, and homes, am I upholding dignity today? Musa's legacy was now permanent, etched not only in plaques, awards, and legislation, but in hearts across the continent. The scattered bills of that fateful day had risen again, symbolizing resilience, justice, and the transformative power of patience, courage, and unwavering principle. And as the first stars appeared over Cheptiret, Musa Kibet knew one truth above all: the seeds of dignity, once sown, could grow into forests of change. Friends, the story you've witnessed today is more than one man's courage. It is a call to action for every person across Africa and beyond. Dignity is not given. It is demanded and protected by each of us every day. Have you seen prejudice in your workplace, your school, or even on the streets? Have you watched someone's dreams dismissed because of who they are or what they own? Your voice matters. Your story matters. Join us at African Black Tales to celebrate those who stand with courage, resilience, and grace, turning small acts into powerful change. Share your experiences, inspire others, and be part of a movement that ensures respect is never optional and dignity is never forgotten. Subscribe now and step into the next story of quiet courage that transforms lives, because every voice, every action, and every act of respect can plant the seeds for lasting change.